I'm David Cotton. I'm a father, a brother, a son. I'm a retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General, a former senior executive in the Department of Defense, a corporate vice president, and now a life coach. At the age of 59, I told my wife, my kids, and the world, I'm gay. Join me as I talk with others who've made this coming out journey late in life to become who they really are.
You're listening to Out Late with David.
My guest today is a Grammy-nominated songwriter, a musician, a singer, an author, and a columnist. He is neither straight nor gay. At age 73, after 3 traditional marriages, he now identifies as bisexual. Today he'll share with us the joys and challenges of being bi in a world that often does not understand. Joining us today from his home in Oregon is Rand Bishop. Rand, thanks for being here today.
Glad to be here.
I was thrilled to discover that you wrote my favorite Toby Keith song, My List.
Yes.
It's a beautiful song about a man making a to-do list and reminding himself to do those really important things in life. You also recorded a version of the song where you're singing it. And if you don't mind, I'd like to kick off our conversation today with a short clip.
Sure.
I cross them off as I get them done, but when the sun is set, there'll be more than a few things left I haven't got to yet. Like go for a walk, say a little prayer, take a deep breath of mountain air, put on my glove, play some catch. It's time that I made time for that. Wade the shore, cast a line, look up a long lost friend of mine, sit on the porch, give my girl a kiss, start living, that's the next thing on my list.
Start living, that's the next thing on my list. Oh, I just love that line.
Mm-hmm.
That lyric, it means so much to me. But where were you in your life when you wrote that, and what did it mean to you?
It actually was one of several songs that I wrote in about 1999, and of course I believe every word of the song, and I aspire to live by it. But I was surprised at how meaningful it was to so many people. That song ended up to be the most played song on country radio for that entire year, and somebody asked me after that song was a hit, they said, well, does that change your priorities, your life priorities? And I said, no, man, I'm still trying to make it in show business.
Well, my story, I was in the U.S. military, running at night in the dark Saudi desert to do my physical fitness training, and Armed Forces Network would be country music at night. And that's when I heard it for the first time, which then made me reflect back to my children that were in elementary school and my wife waiting for me to return, not knowing when I was going to come back. Listening to it, it still hits me every single time, and I tear up when I hear it. So it has an enduring impact.
That means so much to me to hear that.
So you say in the song, start living. Is that the thing you do when you come out and live your life authentically?
I think so, yeah. I certainly wasn't thinking about that at the time. That was a good decade before I actually came out. I was living, at that point, a very dishonest life. And justifying it in every way I could possibly justify it. And so, it may have presaged my finally facing my own truth and making the pledge of being honest.
Your life, it's like a novel. You have so many twists and turns. You're an author. You write lyrics. 6 books, contribute to things like medium.com, online articles in their Pen and Prism section. So at age 73, how would you describe the man you are today, both creatively and sexually?
As far as my sexual orientation is concerned, I consider myself bisexual, but I prefer to identify as queer simply because my experience with a man being bisexual has not been all that well accepted. And it hasn't been accepted, not only accepted or understood by the straight world, but also by a lot of people in the gay community as well. I encountered a lot of men and even close friends who I came out to, who were the gay friends, who would say, "Oh, come on, Rand, just admit it. You're gay. Just admit it." And I really honestly, after having lived so dishonestly for so long, I couldn't say that because it's not true. I find myself, I've always found myself pretty much in the center of the Kinsey scale. And, and I wish, very often, I wish that I could say that I was either straight or gay, because
Did these friends ever tell you why they were doubting you and pushing you one way or the other?
they think that it's a compromise to say that you're not, strictly gay. And so they resent the fact that a man would say that he was equally attracted to women and men. And also I found out that a lot of gay men, they'd gone through very unpleasant experiences getting involved with bisexual men, and they'd feel used. But I can understand how a gay man who falls in love with a bisexual man might get hurt pretty badly because of that experience. So I think that there's an attitude in gay culture within some. It's not as pervasive today as it once was, but an attitude that it's an either or thing. It's a binary. It's you're either straight or you're gay. And
yeah, I think it's actually broadening a bit. Is what I see, is that the lines aren't as defined, and it's more acceptable to be on a spectrum of sexuality versus in a particular
yes, it has
hard slot.
There's absolutely there. It's become more acceptable, but there are still some attitudes, and the fact that somebody would actually have the temerity for me to identify the way I identify, and for them to say, "Oh no, what you're saying doesn't exist." I've known I was bisexual since I was 19 years old. I've identified that way for 50 years now. So,
what was that realization when you were at that age?
Well, David, you and I come from very different worlds. I was in rock bands in my early 20s, and one of the first bands that I had that was assigned to a major label was a glam rock band. And this was in the very early 70s, and I started dressing androgynously and really messing around with gender roles. I delighted in the idea of shocking people to think that, oh my God, what gender is this person? And I was kind of a punk, I kind of had a punk attitude, and quite honestly, I was a very pretty young man, and I was wearing makeup and androgynous clothes, and men were attracted to me. There was actually, in the music business, there was what was identified within that community, what's called the gay mafia. And it involved a lot of music executives, managers, people who were in power in the music business who liked young men. And I became kind of a boy toy for several of these very powerful and rich people who treated me to expensive vacations and meals and etc. And I told these men that yes, I was bisexual because I realized that I enjoyed those sexual experiences. I enjoyed being desired by another man. I was very comfortable with being with men sexually, and I was married at the time. So and my wife knew that I was bisexual. When we had our first child, I decided, well, I've got the queer out of my system. I'm just going to be a straight father, husband, provider. And so I went back into the closet when I was about 28. And, that didn't work out too well, because eventually I started discovering places where men were meeting one another. And I fell into that world, and it eventually started to rule my life. So even though I identified as bisexual, it wasn't really so much an identity as it is now. It was more of a behavior. In other words, I felt the excitement, the attraction of being with men, and I called myself bisexual, but it was mostly contingent on my behavior. So that's what enabled me to fool myself into thinking I'd got all that out of my system, if you know what I mean.
So what was the shift from the behavior to a feeling of identity as bisexual?
Quite honestly, that's been fairly recent. It's not the behavior that defines our identity. It's our true selves. It's who we are. And that's also been a stressful and difficult thing to communicate to my female partner, because she thinks, or has thought in the past, that I could just manage my behavior and that would change me. And that's what I had thought back then when I decided that I'd gotten the queer out of my system. It's who I am, not what I do.
You're listening to Out Late with David.
The book I'm recommending is Fashionably Late, Gay, Bi, and Trans Men Who Came Out Later in Life. This anthology contains 17 stories, edited by Vinnie Kinsella, based upon the life experiences of the men in the Portland, Oregon Late Bloomers Club. I would guess that you might find a little bit of your own story in this book. Since this episode features a guest that is bisexual, I also recommend the website ambi.org. That's ambi.org. Ambi is an organization of bi people with chapters around the globe for bisexual and bi-friendly allies. If we jump back to the childhood years, were there any childhood encounters that had you maybe questioning, I like girls, I like boys?
I had a couple of
I'm not sure.
encounters that when I was about 11 years old, and this kind of the first time that I experienced an older male person coming on to me in a sexual way. It was a camp counselor. He took me into his cabin quite frequently, and he would do it under the guise of, well, I'm going to fix you some lemonade and we'll look at some maps. And, he put his hands on me, and it's a pretty vague recollection, but I ended up getting the golden feather at the end of the week as camper of the week that he would give away. And it was quite an honor, amongst the campers there. And I knew I didn't deserve it. There were kids who were better canoers and better knot makers. And I got this award, and I knew that it was because of this personal relationship that I had allowed, with this camp counselor, which in retrospect, I think there's probably some residual trauma that I haven't dealt with yet in regard to that. And it also set the stage for my using my looks and my androgyny in my early 20s to attract rich, powerful men who would treat me to all sorts of goodies. And then I was in the theater, repertory theater, and one of the actors befriended me. He was older than me, a few years older, and he was gay, and I was real interested. And he groomed me over that entire summer and treated me to my first real gay sex experience. And at that point, I denied that I even enjoyed it, because once again, I had this thinking that, okay, well, that was an interesting experience, and I'm glad I had it, and I'm glad I got it over with, but I'll never do that again. And yet I found myself time and time again finding that I couldn't resist being in those situations.
So how long or what period of time did you have those types of experiences and denying it time and time again, and you eventually said, okay, this is who I am?
Well, it wasn't too long after that theater experience that I started getting involved with androgyny, and in the rock and roll world, it was pretty accepted, that people would be not all that either straight or gay. it just was kind of accepted in the culture. I just kind of accepted that that was part of my life. It was something I enjoyed for the most part. Eventually, I started feeling used. I started feeling because I never took advantage of these relationships with these men to try to further my career because I felt that that would be prostituting myself. I did have emotional feelings for one of those men and still do. He had a harem of young men who he would be involved with. And he was quite open and honest about that. I mean, he didn't pretend to love me, but I kind of fell in love with him. That was my first emotional experience in regard to having feelings for another man. Everything else was just basically sexual. It was excitement. It was dangerous. It was risky. It was all of that stuff was exciting for for me as a young man to be involved with.
So with this excitement with the men and the feelings that you had, you've been married 3 times.
Yes.
I believe, to women each time.
Not only that, but I'm in a long-term relationship now with a woman. So, which is not a marriage in that we live 100 miles apart from each other. But we've been seeing each other for 8 years. We still have a very, very good sexual relationship and a great chemistry. And we, quite honestly, have not worked out. We continue to be very open and honest and discuss my sexual orientation. And I have yet to have what I would have come to desire, which is to actually have an emotional relationship with another man, to actually have a boyfriend. It's taken me a long time to get to that point because sex with men, up until fairly recently, has just been something that felt good, that I kind of needed. I don't want to have not had the experience of sleeping night after night with another man, of sharing a life. I've denied that to myself time and time again because I keep falling in love with women.
So why do you think you don't fall in love with men?
I haven't given myself that opportunity.
You just have a shield of some sort that you put up to...
No, I just have never been have allowed a relationship with a man to develop to that point. And there is a defense mechanism that has stood in the way of that, and there's quite a bit of actually personal denial that that's something that I want or need. And it's only been in the last couple of years where I've started to entertain the thought that that's something that I would really like to experience and explore.
What do you believe is behind that denial?
Well, being with a woman who I don't want to hurt, who I don't want to complicate our relationship. I often think that I wish that I could just be straight or gay, because there are communities that accept gay people and accept straight people, but there really isn't a community of bisexual people on that level.
So back to the wives that you had, when did you tell them that of your sexual orientation or your feelings about your sexuality, and how did they react to that?
Well, it was different for each one. I was married the first time for 11 years, and I got married quite young. I was, I think, 21, and she was 19. We had what we called in retrospect a rock and roll marriage. Neither of us was actually faithful to the other. It was a kind of an open marriage until we had our first child. I told my second wife, I had a very, very brief kind of a rebound relationship with a woman who is since passed on. When we separated, she asked me, she said, "Are you?" I said, "Yes, I'm bisexual." And she said, "Oh, well, I kind of thought so." She said, "Because you are how you are." And I never asked her what she meant by that. So, and I regret that because she's gone now, and I will never be able to ask that question to her. Now, the interesting thing with my third marriage was that was a choice. I just chose her because she seemed to be stable, intelligent. We shared a sense of humor. She was really cute. We looked cute together. And my first wife had said, "Oh, I told her everything about you. I told her all the dirt about you." So my assumption was, during the course of a 25-year relationship, that this woman knew that I had had a background in which I had sexual relations with guys, and that I was bisexual. And so when I came out to her 22 years into our marriage, because I had gotten so depressed and suicidal, having lived for years a double life, basically. I was one person inside that little craftsman bungalow in Nashville, and I was another person outside that door. Outside that door, I was cruising all the time, looking for that next encounter. I justified my behavior by saying, "Oh, well, this is good for my marriage because I'm getting all of this out of my system outside of the house, and I'm not bringing it into the family. So it makes me a better husband. It makes me a better father." Living a double life puts a tremendous stress on your psyche. And eventually I just couldn't handle the lie anymore. And I started going to therapy, and knowing that I was going to have to compose a coming out speech to my wife, but by the same token, I thought she knew anyway.
So how did you deliver that coming out speech?
Well, my timing was really bad. We were driving, and I pulled over at a rest stop, and I said, "There's something I need to tell you." And I told her. And at first she was relieved, because she said, "Oh my God, I thought you were going to tell me you wanted a divorce." The one thing she ever asked of me was fidelity. I fooled myself for years and years into thinking that I wasn't being unfaithful. So I thought I was living up to my marriage vows, but it was a total lie. And I was lying to myself. I was lying to her. I was lying to the world. I mean, I literally thought that, I had a pretty good life insurance policy. I thought I'd be better. My family and my children would be better off without me. After I realized how much I had hurt her, I hated myself. I had that moment of liberation, for having spoken my truth, and then realizing that my truth had been so painful for her, because I loved her. And I hated myself for hurting her. I hated myself for lying. I hated myself for being a liar. And I made a pledge at that point that I will never, ever be dishonest again.
Okay.
And so every person that I've ever dated since, I've been forthright from the get-go about my sexual orientation and my identity. And I never thought I would find another woman, who would even make an effort to understand. And I'm fortunate to have found somebody who is the best relationship I've ever had. But we're still challenged with how to deal with my same-sex attraction. She asks questions. And since I've made a pledge of honesty, I answer them. And, our deal is, if I stray, if I mess up, if I act out, I have to come to her and tell her. And that's happened a number of times. At one point, she said, "You know what? Why don't you just find a boyfriend and get it over with? So we'll know where we're at that point." She can't guarantee me that we're going to continue in our relationship as it is. But she doesn't want to be going around with this inevitability hanging over her head, knowing that eventually I'm going to meet somebody. And that's what my desire is, because I've told her. So it's not easy by any means. But what is wonderful is the fact that we can be totally honest and forthright with one another.
It sounds like the thread there in your current relationship, the takeaway from your experiences in life, is that one of honesty and then living with whatever comes out of being honest.
That's very perceptive, David. And I couldn't have put it in more succinct language. That is absolutely true. And, we've had to work toward getting to this place, even though I was open and honest with her on our first date.
As a life coach, I'm committed to help you discover the passions in your life and help you map a course to achieve the things you really want. Together, we will unwind those persistent self-doubts that are holding you back. You'll begin to see your passions more clearly and set achievable goals. Throughout your journey, I'll be there to challenge and encourage you in moving forward to discover your authentic self. For more information about my personal life coaching services, or to arrange a complimentary consultation, visit davidcottoncoaching.com.
You're listening to Out Late with David.
So back to your family, you had children. How did they react when dad's bisexual, or do they even know?
I have a daughter by my first marriage. I have a son by my second marriage. I have another daughter by my third marriage. My youngest daughter was just starting college. She didn't take it well. Not because, I don't think because of my sexual orientation, but more because of the divorce and because of the fact that I had wounded her mother so badly. Didn't speak to me for quite a while, but we healed our relationship and we're very close now. My oldest child, who was an LGBTQ advocate, has a number of gay friends and lesbian friends and same-sex couple friends, and she was so angry with me, not because, once again, about my sexual orientation, but because I had lied, because I had been dishonest for so long. Those two relationships took a long time to heal. I didn't come out to my son simply because he lived in Oklahoma. A little over a year ago, he was coming out from Oklahoma to a memorial that I'd put together for both of my parents who passed away during the pandemic. And so I just had to call him up and say, I have to tell you something because you're going to hear about it when you get here because everybody else knows. And I told him I'm bisexual. And his response was, "Oh, do you have a boyfriend now?"
Yeah, you're not the first I've heard that from, is that the person you think's going to be upset is supportive and vice versa. And both can change over time, too.
Yeah.
So just wait it out and be patient.
Yeah, and I've heard it from a number of other people. This is new news to them. It's not new news to us.
Well, in 2019, you finished a book called The Trek, if I recall, where you did the pilgrimage, from Southern California up to Oregon coast with your dog. What was the genesis of that and motivation behind doing that adventure?
I felt like the country was just getting mean. This was post the 2016 election, and I wanted to know if there were still nice people out there in the world. And I figured the best way for me to find that out would be to travel by foot. And here I was, this gray-haired, bearded man pushing a cart along the highway, and people would, make the natural assumption that I was a homeless person. There were people who hung a U-turn on the highway and came back to ask me if I need water, if I need a ride, if I need, And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that 9 out of 10 people are still nice, regardless of their political beliefs. And I used this as an opportunity to test myself, to see how I felt in those circumstances. And it's kind of very similar, now that I think of it, to the way I interacted as an androgynous glam rocker in my early 20s. I was testing the boundaries. I'm a big project person. I always have to have a huge, almost undoable task, whether it be a book or a play or a public performance, a major public performance. In this case, it was this long walk, a 900-mile walk over the course of 90 days. And I'm glad I did it. I'll never do it again.
I'm fascinated by that experience that you had. I would challenge you to think about how could you take the intent of that walk based in our community, the queer community, to help people understand who we are, as there's this wave of negative legislation that was, washing across the country in this past legislative cycle and will come up again this next cycle, I would expect, to build awareness. Did you see any hope to change minds on this trek?
I wasn't out to change anybody's mind, but I was out to find what I call square inches of common ground. And it wasn't a matter of persuading anyone. It was really a matter of humanizing each other. And I think that it has been proven time and time again, although it's not always true, that the more familiar we become with people that we may have innately distrusted in the past or have been taught to dislike or distrust or fear, that the more we become familiar with those people, the more human they become. The more human they become, the more we know we have in common. And you really discover along the way that we have far more in common than we disagree on.
Let me ask you this. Do you find that you're more comfortable in groups where everyone knows you're bisexual, or does it not matter?
I feel less and less comfortable in circumstances where I'm not out. I want people to know that whole complete truth about me. I'm not going to walk up to perfect strangers and just say, hi, I'm Rand and I'm bi. I'm queer. But I would like the opportunity in a discreet and unthreatening way to make that knowledge known. So it's so important for me to be involved with a community of people that I can relate to openly, honestly, and know that I'm not going to be judged. And I feel kind of like this is my current mission, is to normalize that as much as possible by being open and honest about my own sexual orientation and my own circumstance. So I encourage people to take other guys, to take things at their own pace, but work toward a life of total honesty.
Rand, it's been fascinating hearing your story today. But before we go, can you tell folks where they can watch your one-man show?
I would encourage anybody who is interested to look up my YouTube theatrical concert, which is called Songs, Observations, and Confessions. And I do have a YouTube channel that has a number of LGBTQ themed songs, and this particular performance gets 18 songs and stories, but it's not exclusively about my sexual orientation, although here I am standing in front of an audience of 90 people, telling them my story.
Well, thank you, Rand Bishop, for your time today and telling your story, being open and honest, your whole complete truth. It's very much appreciated. No doubt this will touch someone and it will help them on their journey. Thank you again.
I hope so. Thank you, David.
We are in a time of significant change, where a staggering 58% of LGBT adults now identify as bisexual. Bisexual individuals are finding support and camaraderie within the community, emphasizing that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to coming out or self-acceptance. While the journey of coming out later in life may still be marked by challenges, it's heartening to see that the perception and acceptance of bisexuality are progressing in both the LGBTQ+ and straight communities. As we continue to share stories, educate, and advocate, we can look forward to a future where everyone, regardless of their age, feels empowered to embrace their true selves. I thank today's guest, Rand Bishop, and wish him joy and happiness as he continues his journey of self-discovery and acceptance. That's all for this episode of Out Late with David.
To hear more episodes, visit outlatewithdavid.com. And to learn more about personal life coaching services, go to davidcottoncoaching.com.